In our last video, we looked at situations in which a government imposes a maximum price in a market below the equilibrium price or a minimum price in the market above the equilibrium price. We looked at the specific cases of rent controls meant to keep housing affordable for certain families and minimum wages meant to raise the wage rate for lower income workers. We concluded that binding price controls lead to a disequilibrium in the market in which they are imposed, reducing total welfare overall in that market. In this video, we're going to look at a different situation, one in which the price control imposed by the government is what we call non-binding. A non-binding price ceiling is a price ceiling set above equilibrium. So this would be a maximum price set above equilibrium, above PE. A non-binding price floor is a minimum price set below the equilibrium price, PE. Let's get right into our graphs here. What if the government were to impose a maximum rent that was higher than the equilibrium rent in the market? This is our equilibrium rent for housing. And the government decides to set a maximum price, we'll call this P max, set above this. This would be the max rent, maximum rent. The goal, of course, is to help low-income households, to help those who would otherwise struggle to afford housing. So government sets a maximum price above equilibrium. The question is, what impact will this have on the quantity supplied and the quantity demanded? And the answer is no impact. There will be no impact because the current equilibrium price is actually lower than the maximum price. So the maximum is what we call non-binding. In order for the maximum to become binding, there would need to be a shift in demand and or supply. Only if demand were to increase for housing, let's say out to D1, would the non-binding price ceiling of P max become binding. In this situation, it would create a shortage of affordable housing. But at the current equilibrium of PE and QE, a maximum price set above equilibrium has no impact on the equilibrium in the market. So let's put some notes down here. So a non-binding price ceiling has no impact on the market. In other words, if the equilibrium price is lower than the maximum price imposed by the government, there will be no impact on the quantities demanded and supplied in the market. Only if there's an increase in demand or a decrease in supply driving the equilibrium above the maximum would this maximum price become binding. All right, well, what about minimum wages? Let's say that the minimum wage in a state is currently $5 an hour. So I can put a point down here at $5. Minimum wage at $5 per hour. But let's say the equilibrium wage rate is currently $8 per hour. What impact does the minimum wage have on the market? The answer is no impact. If the equilibrium is higher than the minimum, then that minimum is what we call non-binding. So what would cause that minimum wage to become binding? Well, only two things could cause this $5 minimum wage to have an effect on this market. Either the supply of labor would have to increase to S1, or the demand for labor would have to decrease to a point where the equilibrium wage rate in the market is less than the minimum wage rate. In such a scenario, the minimum wage would become binding. It would create a disequilibrium. For example, if the supply of labor increased to S1, this price floor would become binding because the quantity supplied at the minimum wage of $5, that would be their QS, would now be greater than the quantity demanded at the minimum wage of $5, QD. So in this case, we would have a surplus of workers. Non-binding price ceilings and price floors have no effect on the quantities demanded and supplied in the market. If you set a maximum price that's above the current equilibrium price, of course that maximum is simply not going to be effective in the market. Only if a price ceiling is set below equilibrium will it have an effect on the quantities demanded and supplied. Likewise, only a price floor set above equilibrium will have an effect on the quantities demanded and supplied. Non-binding price floors, for example, a minimum wage set $3 below the prevailing equilibrium wage in the market, are going to have no effect. However, they might be used as a precaution to make sure that the wage rate never falls below a certain level. Of course, if the supply of labor were to increase, then this wage rate of $5, this minimum wage would become binding. Likewise, if the equilibrium rent were to rise above the maximum rent, then this maximum rent would become binding.